I have started the recording. Anything else that I've forgotten, officers, before we hand it over to the forum?
Question, Nick, are we voting tonight, or are we going to do that afterwards? Those of us who are members of the club.
Yes, after the forum is complete, we'll ask anyone who's not a voting member to leave this Zoom, and then we'll have discussion and voting, and I'll also open the electronic voting at that time as well.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right, and I'll note that I'll make a final note. I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, Brian, but we do have 9 questions, and they were sent to the candidates ahead of time. So let me just go and hand it over to Brian Martin, our officer and past president. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, and you can begin the recording if you haven't already.
I have.
Okay, and welcome, Brian Martin, officer in the club, past president. I'll be the MC for the evening. We're going to start off with opening statements from the candidates. My understanding is that we have 8 in attendance of the 9 candidates who have filed to run. Omar Farmer has at the last minute said that he's not able to come. And the candidates will start off with a 2-minute opening statement. And then we'll have 9 questions with each person having 1 minute to respond. And we'll rotate alphabetically through the list of candidates by last name as to who goes first in each of those. And then also a closing statement of 1 minute at the end. And we will try to keep things moving along, as we recognize there are a number of candidates. It's great to have choices for an open seat like this, and that we have a lot of 9 questions that were previously shared with the candidates, knowing that there was one that we thought maybe wouldn't be able to come, actually had said there was a conflict, but the conflict went away. In any event, so there will not be audience questions on this forum. But if you're a paid member, then we'll definitely have discussion afterwards. And so the order, if you could, when you do start off, let's give us a good pronunciation of your name. We'll start off with alphabetically by last name. The way we're doing it is Ben, then Nikki, then John, then Ken, then Greg, then Chris, then Gerald, then Laurel. And I'll call each person out when it's their turn. Yes.
And if I can interject, so I'm the timer, and so I just want to show you where that is so you can keep track. It's in my window, but I think also it's probably easiest in the upper right-hand corner. You should be able to see the timer set up there. So everybody good?
I'm not seeing in the upper right-hand corner of my window.
You don't see in the upper bar? It's not there? Right next to where it says view?
Next to the view menu?
Where it says view? Upper right, yeah.
Upper right of the of all the videos.
Not for me, but maybe the candidates. Okay. If a candidate doesn't see it, let us know.
Okay.
Are you seeing it,
Silence,
Nick?
I think, means they see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, good. So let's start off with a 2-minute opening statement with Ben.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? Mic check. All right. Hi, everybody. Oh, for the I never got the questions. If you can share them somehow in the chat or email me. But great to meet you all. Ben Bart. I know some of you. My name is Ben Bartlett. I'm the vice mayor. I'm from Vice Mayor of the City of Berkeley, on City Council 7 years there, and I'm running for Alameda County Supervisor, District 5, and believe it or not, my story begins with the need for county assistance. My mother was evicted, and it was quite a brutal eviction. She and some senior citizens were evicted, and when I went to go get she and her friends backup housing, senior housing, I was informed that there was no senior housing. There was a 14-year wait list. The same year, the county had nearly $1 billion surplus, and that, of course, was ridiculous, and it turned my life upside down. So I ran for office to make other people be spared of that trauma and their families. And so in the last 7 years, I've been hard at work on exactly these issues. helping Berkeley lead the region in homelessness with a 5% drop in homelessness, while the county went up 22%. Public safety by creating a specialized care unit, a civilian mental health response, which allowed police to focus on violent crime, which has done quite well. Housing with the introduction of 1,000 affordable units and thousands more market rate units. And healthcare, creating first of its kind in the nation, supportive housing called Step Up Housing, with a whole new model that is meant to address the crisis on the streets. And so, these works that we've been working on have been really important and integral to our success, but we need the county as a partner, and we need the whole county to benefit from what we've been working on. And that's why I'm running to restore and strengthen these ties and expand the good life for everyone. So ask for your support. Thanks so much, Ben Bartlett.
Thank you.
I did place the questions in the chat.
Thank you. Next up, we have Nikki.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Nikki Fortunato Bass. I want to introduce myself and let you know why I am running for Supervisor of Alameda County District 5. I'm a 25-year Alameda County resident, a mother to a teenage daughter, a lifelong organizer, and an effective legislator that gets things done, working in coalition with our community. And most importantly, I'm a champion of working families. I was raised by Filipino immigrant parents, and they taught me the values of fairness and being persistent in justice. And for decades prior to elected office, I've been leading the fight together with many of you for an East Bay where everyone is healthy, safe, and housed. And doing this work for over the past few decades, we've won a minimum wage for Oakland workers, safe workloads for Emeryville hotel workers, sweatshop-free schools and cities with Berkeley students and residents, and greater environmental health with our East Bay communities. Serving my second term as Oakland Council member for District 2 and as Council President, I've partnered hand in hand with community to pass important policy. Working with tenant advocates, we passed the strongest COVID eviction moratorium in the state, which is a model that has served Berkeley and the county. But we need the county's partnership to stem a wave of evictions. We've worked to expand community safety with more violence prevention and new crisis response teams, but we need the county's partnership to align our criminal legal system towards more prevention, diversion, and rehabilitation. We need a champion at the Board of Supervisors for our working families and our most vulnerable residents. And I'm here to partner deeply with our cities and our unincorporated areas to focus on homelessness, housing, healthcare, as well as safety and sustainability. And I humbly ask for your endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have John.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is John Bowders. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I've lived in the Bay Area here in District 5 for about 13 years now, and my journey here is one that has really helped me be a leader and a partner with people across the Bay Area. I'm a formerly unhoused LGBT youth who came here from the Midwest as a transplant shortly after my adolescence, and I have spent most of my career working with people who are unhoused. I've spent almost 25 years in nonprofit public advocacy and assistance. My work has included working directly in homeless outreach services. I went back to school on a public interest scholarship and became an attorney for people who are unhoused. I'm a former eviction defense attorney for people who are facing homelessness. And I've also spent the last 9 years now working as a victims advocate for victims of violent crime, including sex traffic victims, sexual assault survivors, and mothers of murdered children. I leverage the work I've spent working alongside with behavioral health specialists, nurses, doctors, and people who provide care to people who've experienced trauma in my day job, and I do advocacy to make sure that the voices of victims of crime is centered in the discussion around public safety. I'm in my 8th year as a member of the Emeryville City Council, and in that role, I've done a number of things as a regional and local leader. I passed the state's largest affordable housing bond per capita in California history, which we've used to build hundreds of units of low-income housing home opportunities for people across the city of Emeryville. I've partnered with leaders in the city of Oakland to provide housing and homeless services, including shelter for the Family Front Door program inside our city as part of a regional collaboration. I've been the chair of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District for the past 2 years. We've passed earth-shattering legislation and regulations that have the strictest refinery regulations in the United States. And I've also served as the Alameda County Transportation Commission chair for the past few years, ensuring that we make mode shift and mode change so that we stop using single occupancy vehicles, fund mass transit, and alternatives to fossil fuel burning vehicles. I'm looking forward to your support and endorsement this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ken.
Good evening. I'm Ken Barrick, and I'm running for this seat because in 37 years of living between Berkeley and Oakland, things have never quite felt this way. Crime is making so many people uneasy that people that I know, that I love, that have lived here all their lives are actually talking about leaving the Bay Area. It's the first time I've ever heard it. I'm not leaving the Bay Area. I'm not going anywhere. I love the East Bay. My family's here, my life is here, and my work is here. But still, every time I pass someone who's unhoused on the street and someone who's mentally ill, I feel the need to do something, to intervene. And yet I still have felt like we haven't been able to in any way that's effective. I've also spent my life building effective solutions. I started Seneca Family of Agencies in 1985 with the idea of providing unconditional care for children and youth. And in that time, we started with 12 staff and have grown to a staff of over 1,500, and we serve thousands of children and youth every day. And we serve them in a way that's as unconditional as we can. I've had the great opportunity of working with state, federal, and local government. I've done legislation on children and young adults issues, and I've worked with juvenile justice to bring young people who were stuck in institutions central to the state back to their homes. I know how to do this work. I know how to fund it, and my endorsements are a little bit different than others. Will Lightbourne, the Jerry Brown appointee as the Human Services Director and the Health Director under Gavin Newsom is one of my key endorsements, because Will knows that I know how to create both the solutions and implement the solutions in ways that are effective. I'm asking for your support.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Greg Hodge.
Good morning. Pleasure to meet all of you, and I'm looking forward to a really good conversation today. As Nick, you introduced this conversation by saying, it's sort of an interesting moment that Keith Carson, our current member of the Board of Supervisors in District 5, decided not to run. And I think what had happened is it sort of unleashed a lot of interest in all of us to be able to actually extend our public service. It's a historic moment. It is a moment where the composition of the County Board of Supervisors has changed dramatically with the untimely passing of Wilma Chan, as well as Richard Valle. It looks to me that we've got this opportunity to take what has been in many ways a sort of stodgy bureaucracy and move it to a transformative possibility. I think that we need leaders who are inspiring and inspired right now. Our politic in the East Bay, I look at the recalls, the possible recall of Shane Towers, the mayor of Oakland, the recall effort around Pamela Price. I think those are anti-democratic, frankly, because people ought to have the opportunity to actually serve in office and be able to do the things we know need to be done. The three big issues, I think that previous candidates have spoken to it. And by the way, I respect all of the work that the folks that have done in the past. But homelessness and the unhoused is a critical issue. Public safety, as well as mental health services especially for young folks. I have the skills and expertise and temperament around this. I've served as a member of the Oakland School Board for 8 years. I helped set up the Richmond Office of Neighborhood Safety, which reduced violent crime in Richmond by 70% over a 5-year period. Was an advisor to the development of the Department of Violence Prevention in Oakland, and worked hard during the pandemic to bring resources across our community to bear. And so I would love to have your endorsement, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Chris.
Hello, hey, I'm Chris Moore, and thank you for having this forum today. I want to point out one thing. I think it's interesting that all my candidates and all my colleagues here, who I actually respect for running in this race, they've gone out and gotten this incredible number of endorsements from all the top politicians across the community. The problem is those same politicians are the ones that are responsible for what we're living in today, right? 6,000 businesses stopped paying business tax in Oakland. There are residents and there are shop owners being murdered regularly in this community. We have blight, we have homelessness all throughout the community. They're failed policies. So all these endorsements are from people that have created failed policy that is not working. I'm not a politician. I'm not in this race to be a politician for life. I'm in this race to help you, the people out there in the community, because everybody needs help and they're not receiving it. It's clear. I hear people saying on here, hey, I've done this, I'm working on this, I'm working on this. But we have all these problems. We have so much crime. We're afraid. We have to look over our shoulders. Our children can't even walk in the streets safely. So what I'm here is I'm not seeking the endorsement of any of these politicians with the failed policy out in their community. I want the endorsement of you, the people. And I'm going to bring to you a clean and safe Alameda County. That's what I'm running on. And it's more safety and more services for this community. And you can count on me to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Gerald.
Yes. Since I'm the only Republican among you, and I have to thank Albany Democratic Club for being democratic. I have a short introduction. I am humble Gerald Petchenik. I presume you may not know who I am. I've been solicited by many friends to become a candidate for the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. My politics are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I am in favor of a national bank. I am in favor of the internal improvement system and a high protective tariff. These are my sentiments and political principles. If elected, shall be thankful. If not, it will all be the same. Now, the reason I'm reading that, because obviously it's not a literal situation, but the three things that I think are important flow from the principles of Abraham Lincoln, who I consider the greatest president in the history of this country. So, number one, which I looked at all your websites, I heard what you all said, and you left one thing out big time in your discussion of homelessness and poverty and housing and everything. And that's the F word. And it's not the F word you think. It's called fentanyl. It's called drugs. And that is what I've been fighting for 50 years, since I exposed MK Ultra project of the CIA. Second thing is infrastructure. We need water. There's a guy named John F. Kennedy, you may remember, who proposed North American Water and Power Alliance and building nuclear desalination plants across California.
Sorry,
Thank
Gerald.
you.
Your time is
Your
up.
time's up. Yeah. And lastly, for the 2-minute opening statement, we have Laurel.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm Laurel Plimier, and I am running for Alameda County Supervisor. When I was 20 years old, I signed up to serve our country, spent 4 years on active duty in the Army. Today, I'm ready to serve Alameda County as District 5 Supervisor. I've lived in Alameda County for over 20 years, and I'm the working mom of 2 teens in public school. I grew up on the East Coast in a family that struggled. Sometimes we even relied on food stamps to get by. I worked my way through high school and college. When I got out of the Army, I put myself through law school and practiced patent litigation for 15 years. For years, I have been advocating for progressive policy in Alameda County as a board member and president of the League of Women Voters of Piedmont. I was elected to the California State Board for the League and currently serve on their governance and finance committees, managing a multi-million-dollar budget. I have a master's degree in data science that I got because I wanted to use data as a tool to support governments to make decisions that equitably represent all people. I now run a business for mission-driven nonprofits so they can use tech and data to better assist the people that they serve. In 2017, my elderly parents were forced to relocate multiple times and mostly outside of Alameda County because they couldn't afford the cost of housing. It is terrifying not to know where you're going to be living next month, especially at that age. And it's not a secret that we have a housing crisis in Alameda County. This is just one issue among many that have gone on for too long. And I see these issues as policy failures. I believe we can make better policy decisions. I have the leadership experience, the lived technical know-how, and the passion to lead the county to make decisions that work for everybody in our community. And I would love to have your endorsement. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go on to the questions. Before we do that, I wanted to briefly, people just introduce themselves, but I did want to say what we have brief bios on each person, super brief. And I did want to mention party affiliation as I go through that as well. So, first of all, the club is not able to endorse anyone who is not a Democrat. There are 2 candidates, but we are open to hearing from all the candidates, and that's what we're doing tonight. So we have Ben, who's a Berkeley Council member. These are all Democrats. Ben, Nikki is an Oakland Council member. John is an Emeryville Council member. Ken is an Alameda County Board of Education trustee. Omar, we're not hearing from tonight. Greg is a nonprofit executive. And I'm going to skip over to Laurel as a director, attorney, data scientist. And then we have, those are all the Democrats in the race. And then we have a libertarian was Chris, and Gerald, as you saw and heard from, is a Republican. So we will be able to consider for endorsement all the Democrats, but we will be hearing from everyone tonight. So now we will go to the next person on the list to start, and that would be Nikki. The first question, and you have 1 minute to respond, is Alameda County is a large county with therefore very large districts. Do you support the creation of more districts for the county?
Thank you for that question. I would ask toward what goal? Is there a popular demand for this? I did watch the redistricting process for the county and don't recall this coming up during that process. So I'd certainly want to hear more about the goals and who supports this. That said, if the goal is democratizing county decisions, I would want to work on that with all of you. We can start making the budget process more transparent. That is one way to start that process. With more community engagement. In Oakland, we have a policy for how we engage on the budget, which I was a part of about 10 years ago. So we require each district to have a town hall. We can share information on our county reserves, our fund balances, share service and equity impacts. And so I would really want to dig into this to hear where it's coming from, what the goals are, and really work with the community to address the underlying goals and figure out the solutions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Next up, we have John.
Unmute, there we go. Thank you very much for the question. There's several factors that I believe you have to examine when you're trying to determine whether or not to increase the number of districts within a county. Geographic size should matter less, in my opinion, than the population that's being represented. And representative numbers should increase over time as the county's population does increase. If you look at LA County by way of contrast, it's a county with millions of people that still only has 5 supervisors, and it becomes effectively impossible to adequately represent the needs of all the people you're serving with that level of a ratio. But this needs to still be done carefully because we want to ensure that we don't create too many districts, because that could lead to tribalism. If there are overrepresentation at a county level, you can actually paralyze government's responsiveness. And then why and how the districts are created or added matters, I believe. So there should be an independent redistricting board in the county to ensure that district boundaries are drawn in a way that avoids political gerrymandering. We need to ensure that we don't exclude concentrated minority communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ken.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting idea that deserves discussion. The argument that 5 supervisors allow you to be faster in decision making is true, I'm sure. But I've served now for 15 years on the Alameda County Board of Education, and the districts don't match. And some of the lack of coordination between schools and the county, I think, can be attributable to not having the ability to match up and work together. We have to integrate our county services and schools. When you look at the county budget, 70% of it is a combination of health, mental health, the jails, and law enforcement. And those things, I think, could potentially match up better with closer jurisdiction. So I wouldn't want to go beyond 7, but I think if we did 7 well, we could align better and we could get better integrated services.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Greg.
It's an interesting proposition. I think I agree with actually some of the comments I've heard so far. Excuse me, I think the purpose, and if there is a call from the unincorporated areas in particular to do this, I think that the more important question is like, how responsive can the current board of supervisors be? Things like having meetings on Tuesday mornings versus in the evenings that people can fully participate in. The coordination across the county, city, school districts that are all represented. Those are the things that I think matter the most in terms of getting the folks who have the greatest needs, the greatest services. So I just think that there's a way that we can think about this. I don't necessarily think that more government is better. I think that the idea that more representation, more voice, more participation is actually what you're looking for. So if having more districts get you to that, it would be an idea worth considering. But I think that more importantly, the notion of transparency, accountability of the current board composition is really what's important.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Chris.
Okay, hey, thank you. The county has a group called LAFCO. It's a Local Agency Formation Commission. So if you're talking about new districts or new formation of across the county, that group's there to do studies for that and create those. And I think if they study those and then the will of the people says, yes, we want to be better served by the county, then absolutely I would support that. I think the issue, though, is that the county, they spend $4.1 billion a year. And when I'm out on the street talking to people, they don't know what the county does. It's buried on their website. The services are buried. And I think that's the issue, is that those in the unincorporated counties, which I used to live for 20 years, they don't know what services are provided. The county does a very poor job of communicating that. And again, that's why I'm there to help communicate that. And that's what I'll do as county supervisor for the district. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Gerald.
My answer is no, spelled N-O. No proposal such as this, which is to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic of Alameda County, is going to help a darn thing. If you want to do something, I put a proposal in the chat. We should all join together, have a forum on stopping fentanyl, stopping drugs, because if you want to do something about homelessness, if you want to do something about crime, you better address stopping drugs, period. Otherwise, it's just good intentions. I love you all like brothers and sisters. I'm in this to get unconditional surrender by the drug cartel to the destruction. If I told you there was a war in the United States and 247, 347, 335 people died. You'd say, what
Okay.
war are you
Gerald,
talking about?
Time's up.
Thank you. Next up, we have Laurel.
Thank you. I love this question. My short answer is yes, but of course within reason. Not only are the districts in our country large, they also are very diverse. And it can be difficult for one individual to champion the voices of so many diverse communities. Creating additional districts within the county is a great way to bring additional voices to the table. This would have inevitable results of policy considerations that might have unintentionally been overlooked without that representation of additional voices that are at the table. Of course, there are challenges to the proposition. If one of them would be that some of the other people mentioned proper districting so that the districts are actually representative of the people within them, so you don't have too many districts. And another challenge is cost. Having a larger board of directors would cost the county additional funds. So budgeting would need also careful consideration.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have our second question, and the first to respond will be John.
We need to go around to Ben.
Oh, sorry, Ben. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah, good question. You know, my knee-jerk response, as always, is to support the expansion of democracy. This is super important right now because you see us under assault all over the place. And so, in one justification that we could make for this, for creating more seats, is that, you know, when you have the single seat representing such a large swath of territory and so many people with such a massive budget and so many layers of services, you end up being run by the staffers. And we've seen that on a small context in my city and others, where you just, you know, one person is challenged to make informed decisions of that magnitude so often, and so, you know, so all encompassing. So in order to take power back from unelected staff and back to the people, I would support, I believe, the creation of more seats. And the nuances are important to get right, because you want to avoid oppression of minorities and you want to get maximum resource allocations. But yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, apologies for that. I will probably do that again, skip over somebody. And so whoever notices, do let me know right away. So next up, we have John, who is going to be starting with question number 2. Running for supervisor represents a high financial bar. Around $8,000 in fees are required to file for office. Do you support reform of this in order to encourage more candidates to step up? And I would note as an aside that Albany has waived fees for candidates for local office, is my understanding. Take it away, John.
Thank you for the question. It's a really important question. And the $8,000 in fees you mentioned for the county supervisor's race is divided into 2 parts. One of them is the filing fee, which is about $1,800, and the remaining roughly $6,200 in fees comes from the ballot statement. Similar to your note as to Albany, in Emeryville, we have reduced the filing fee. It's a $25 filing fee combined with a signature petition list, and we actually cover the cost of the ballot statement, whereas our school district does not, and they pay almost $900 each to have their ballot statement just in the small city of Emeryville. This creates barriers to people of lower income and means from participating in the electoral process as candidates. And I think that the best way to do this is to look at the balance that's needed to be had between making it economically accessible while also ensuring that we don't have a ballot full of people where it's impossible for people to distinguish candidates. So I support waiving the cost for ballot statements for candidates who qualify and creating a tier for allowing people to exchange costs in exchange for signatures.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Ken.
Yeah, this race was actually a great example. There was no real option to gather signatures because it was 3 days. So, and I have to admit that I took a pause when I looked at that and said, okay, basically before I can raise any funds to run, I have to put up this money. It's a barrier and it's just wrong. So I do think we have to think about this eventuality and what alternative we put in for this eventuality. That being said, I don't think it's unreasonable to set a bar for the amount of support you have to run in terms of signatures, in terms of saying there are real people out here who either support my candidacy now or who I can bring in. So I think looking at the signature process, the petition process, expanding on that as a requirement in lieu of these prohibitive fees is an important way to move this forward.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next we have Chris.
Got it. You know, I agree. We have a process that's worked for many years. And in this campaign, you can see we have 9 candidates running. And they have a choice. They can choose to put a ballot statement, which was $6,100 versus the $1,850 for just filing to run. So I think this again comes down to what is the will of the people. Do the people want more candidates? Then they should elect something like that, and that should be proposed to the people and allow them to have more candidates run. I will point out also, though, that if we spread this out to 10, 20, 30 people, you can already see in this campaign, there's 3 or 4 people that have raised 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000. So those candidates that are not able to kind of get in and raise money for the 1850, let's say, they're going to have a struggle in the overall campaign. And I think that's the issue that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Gerald.
I think you skipped over Greg as well.
Oh, Greg. Next up, Greg. Sorry.
Okay. And you were right, Brian. You did it again, but it's okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. I agree with some of what I've heard so far. I mean, I think that I think the barrier to this form of democracy is significant. So here's a couple of suggestions that I would make. One is to lower the actual filing cost to something more reasonable. You know, City of Oakland has, I think it's $600, something like that. And then secondly, if there's an incumbent who does not choose to run, and, you know, what happened in this race was that Supervisor Carlson decided on that Friday not to run. That gave us 5 days, and those 5 days included a weekend. So in effect, you got like 3 days to actually show up and pull papers. One of the things that we could do is if you extend the rules for the signature collection, extend it by 30 days. In that case, and in that way you get more people who can actually show that they're have support from the general public to run, and you don't have that rush to make this all happen in a couple of days.
Thank you, Greg. Time's up.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, my apologies. Next up, we have Gerald.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes.
Real simple. You all know the answer, but again, just like the drug thing I just showed, the pilot who tried to crash the plane, Wiener's bill would make it legal for the guy to crash the plane because hallucinogenic drugs would be decriminalized. So you know the answer on this one too. It's very simple. Registered voters in Alameda County, I checked this out right before we went on, 933,000. The number of people who voted in the 2022 election was 500,000, roughly half. The number who voted in the primary was 300,000, something, roughly a third. Why don't people vote? Because of money. You guys got all the money. That's why you're running. You got the money. So I suggest we all try not to raise a lot of money. I'm actually telling people not to give me money. I'm going to try to run without money just by telling the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Laurel.
Thank you. That's another great question. And my short answer is yes, I support removing barriers to running for office. Of course, and this was also mentioned earlier, you need to be careful that the barrier isn't so low that you get hundreds of candidates for each office, which would create a burden not only for the registrar of voters, but also for the voters themselves. What I do fully support is more transparency from the registrar of voters, so potential candidates can easily access the information they need to make decisions about running for office. For example, and this is a simple example, but to know what to bring with them to the registrar's office when pulling papers. In general, I think transparency of the registrar of voters needs to be improved to make information more accessible to all voters and to potential candidates. And I also will just put in here that I think having a registrar who's dedicated to the registrar of voters and not splitting his time is also worth pursuing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we wrap around to Ben.
Thank you. Good question. This was it was a moment. I actually saw a few of my colleagues here at the window that day. I went through feeling the pain I was that moment. Honestly, as someone who's dedicated his life to helping those who are left behind, those who are left out, those who are overlooked, those who fall by the wayside, how are they ever going to have a voice when it costs $8,000 for them to have a voice to speak? So I for one, I'm still reeling at that cost, and it needs to be reformed. It needs to be. I mean, there's some common sense solutions that are so obvious, as we heard tonight. Exchanging costs for signatures is an easy one. We need to really address this because it's inequitable to the core.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Next
you.
up, we have Nikki.
Thanks for this question. Yes, I do support reducing these fees. I would highlight that I think what we need in order for more candidates to step up is public financing for Alameda County. In Oakland, I co-authored our Democracy Dollars program, which was on the ballot in 2022. Voters passed it and will be implementing in 2026. This is something that the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and others came to us to put on the ballot. And basically what it's going to do is allow Oakland residents who are eligible to vote to have 4 vouchers of $25 each that they can use to support their candidates. The candidates would have some requirements in terms of signatures as well as attending community forums. And in Seattle, what we saw is that this has been able to bring up more candidates representing diverse communities, including communities who historically have not voted at high rates. So I'd go further and look at how we could include public financing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry to jump in, but I'd like to ask that the candidates not post in the chat. It's a bit distracting. So if that's okay with everyone, let's ask the candidates. Let's have the candidates refrain from posting in the chat. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Next up, we have Ken. We'll start with the next question, the third question, which is counties can be seen to have 2 different responsibilities: providing services and acting as the city government for unincorporated areas. What experience do you have in both areas?
Well, with my experience on the County Board of Ed, I've got to know the unincorporated areas, and particularly, Aisha Knowles, who represents the larger part of the unincorporated areas, brought not just the education issues, but the fire issues, the law enforcement issues, all of the difficulties, and frankly, the inequities that the unincorporated areas face in terms of their representation. That being said, the unincorporated residents have to decide what their future is and how we're going to come together on that. So in terms of expediting the process, to the degree that there's consensus and a desire to come together, I do think that there are economic benefits that are really significant. And when you look at what some of the revenue that was lost out by the unincorporated areas during COVID, that was just simply not a good process. That being said, folks have got to agree on where they want to go, and they've got to be able to make a determination themselves.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Next is Greg.
This is a really good question. I think that the services part, in terms of my experiences, have been as a member of the school board, making sure that young people have the educational services that they needed. The more recent example for me in terms of working in incorporated areas was during the pandemic. I was a key facilitator for something called the African American Response Circle, and I sat on the county's a community advisory task force. And so I learned a lot about what was going on in Ashland and Cherryland and other unincorporated parts of the county. And I think that's a good model for how we ought to be moving, is that, you know, we had forums, we had information that was from our public health officer, Nick Moss. We heard from Kimmy Watkins Tart, our public health director, and we heard from community players who were doing a lot of the work that helped fill in the gaps of the county. It was the PPE delivery. It was the credible messengers. It was the social distancing messages and all of the things that made that sort of work. And so I think that it's really important to pay attention to unincorporated areas as we do this work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Chris.
Hey, I've lived in Alameda County for 40 years. I think maybe the longest here of the candidates here. 20 of those years were in unincorporated county, and 20 were actually in the corporated portion of the county. So I understand the services that we received there in Cherryland for the 20 years I lived there, and how the county provided services, and some they did not. I also, during my career as a CPA, I was a government audit specialist. I audited the city of Hayward, the city of Berkeley, the Port of Oakland, also at the county level up in Solano. I understand how things are allocated and how these counties operate. There is, as I mentioned before, $4.1 billion that is spent across the county of Alameda, but most people don't understand it's there. I've spent tons of hours talking to the county and going to county meetings, as well as the city of Oakland and the city of San Leandro. Spent more time than probably anybody here but Nikki, and that's how my experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Gerald.
Yes. On the question of the services unincorporated, I was looking over before the discussion here tonight, the major employers of Alameda County, its government, Alameda County Law Enforcement, Sheriff's Department, medical, out to Bates Summit, BART, California State University, East Bay, Cooper Vision, Pleasanton, Optical Goods. So the only way you can sustain a tax revenue base that can support services for all, incorporated, unincorporated, it's called manufacturing, production, infrastructure, otherwise known as physical economy. Okay? You can't run a state or a county on speculative gains from real estate. That's gone to hell, 50% collapse. And stocks collapse.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Laurel.
Thank you. I have experience in management and decision-making, and I have the skills to effectively manage and make informed, educated decisions. I've been making decisions and managing people since my days as a platoon leader 30 years ago, providing services for my soldiers. I'm an attorney. I understand the intricacies of the written word. I've crafted and evaluated policy documents, contracts, licenses, patents, legal briefs for decades. I'm also a data scientist, and I understand the value of data and making data-driven decisions that will actually have the impact they're intended to have. I have managed multi-million-dollar budget in the nonprofit sector, and I manage the budget of my own business every single day. And the biggest consideration in both of those areas is bringing in additional revenue always. And I am committed to finding creative sources of funding, ensuring every agency has a representative responsible for collaborating on state and federal funding sources, so none of those opportunities are left on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, so the counties in Berkeley, we have our own health department. And so we've had to deal with the services component of the county robustly since my entire tenure. And I ended up basically rewriting the city of Berkeley's healthcare plan. And it involves deep commitment from the county. So the county service deliveries, I'm very, very familiar with it, from healthcare to seniors to affordable housing to mental health. And I'm aware of the acute lack of resources that we're facing going forward that we have to address. And with the unincorporated, the bulk of my experience in the unincorporated territories of the county have been as an attorney, pro bono cases, largely defending seniors from elder abuse and neglect and many of the sort of RV park areas in the unincorporated parts of the county. That's pretty much been the extent, and they need protection.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Nikki.
Thank you. So I have served on the Oakland City Council for 5 years. I'm in my second term, and I'm proud to be a leader on writing legislation. I mentioned our COVID eviction moratorium earlier. I was proud to do that with tenant advocates. That was a model that I shared with Mayor Arreguín, as well as former County Supervisor Wilma Chan, specifically so that the county's unincorporated areas would have tenant protections during that time. I've worked on complex legislation like updating our business tax to make it more tiered and progressive. I've built strong relationships with our city administrator, our city attorney, our mayor, other council members to reach consensus to push policy forward. I've also worked on services, serving my constituents in my own district, to help close encampments by housing people, to speed up creating protected bike lanes after tragedies. And so I've been able to work on both the service provision as well as the legislation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And lastly, for this question, we have John.
Thank you for the question. I have represented the city of Emeryville now for almost 8 years on the city council, including 3 years as its mayor. And I also served as the city's planning commissioner prior to that. I have extensive experience responding to constituent concerns from a local government perspective, which includes everything from land use, tenant protections, infrastructure needs, and providing for our public safety. In my full-time job, I have, as I mentioned, over 20 years experience working in social and human services. This includes having been a community educator and family services provider as a disaster relief director. I've been a homeless services outreach worker, a legal aid attorney, assisting people with mental health and substance use addictions, experiencing homelessness. And I currently spent the last 9 years working as a direct advocate for people who are living with trauma as a result of a crime. I've also worked alongside providers who assist in behavioral health with unmet physical needs, as well as in-home supportive services and child welfare during my career. And in 2014, the County Welfare Directors Association of California, which is the statewide association of 58 human services agencies in the state, awarded me their statewide champion partner award for my work assisting families in the CalWorks program.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next to our fourth question, we have, and it's one that Greg will begin with. The question is, residents in unincorporated areas often feel underrepresented because they have no city government. Do you support accelerated incorporation of unincorporated areas in order to give residents more of a voice and reduce the burden on county government?
Yes, I think I would support that idea if the residents in those areas are supportive of it. It's something that folks want. The expansion of democracy, I think, has been mentioned earlier. I think is a really important issue. I think the idea of more voice, more authentic voice from the incorporated areas makes a whole lot of sense. And so I think that it would really be about asking people in those unincorporated areas what their preferences are, if it makes sense. I don't know necessarily that it will reduce in the short term the burden on county government. I think that, you know, the resources in the county are often underutilized in many ways. And I believe in an equity approach where you actually put resources where resources are needed. And so I think the more important question is like how we distribute the current resources we have, how we make sure that people have a democratic participation in our process and have real voice.
Thank you. Next up, we have Chris.
Thank you. You know, this question is exactly why I'm running. It troubles me that people in the unincorporated areas, you know, they don't understand what the county provides for them. And as I mentioned before, it's buried. The staff, they don't communicate what's out there. They don't know how to communicate out to the community of what's needed for the community. So that's why I'm running. And because I am going to change how this is communicated out to the community and how we can provide better services to the community and really expand what's provided today, but expand to all areas of the community. Thank you.
Gerald.
Yes, I have a similar answer to my answer on the last one, which is we got to get the wealth creation of the physical economy up so we can afford to give residents in unincorporated areas who feel underrepresented, representation. I mean, rearranging this or that when you're on the Titanic is not a policy. And the other thing, I've seen Chris at demonstrations, as I was at City Hall. First of all, people in incorporated and unincorporated got to be alive. So we got to stop the crime. We got to stop these killings. We got to stop the drugs. So people in incorporated, unincorporated areas, and I know that the recall of certain people who have failed is an integral part of answering that question.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you. I generally support this subject, like others have said, to the will of the people who live in those unincorporated areas. If elected, I will ensure that the needs of the communities in the unincorporated areas are met, especially for the more disadvantaged areas of Cherryland and Ashland. But if the unincorporated area is going to become incorporated, it needs to have an avenue to support itself. So we would need to be careful about equity if the acceleration timeline is too aggressive. In some of the disadvantaged areas, there may need to be some interim solutions where the county is providing for additional services like early childhood education or other social services. And I fully support facilitating the growth of the unincorporated areas to move toward incorporation, but it must be in the best interests of the community itself and the county as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ben.
Well, thank you. Of course, I generally support this. However, it's important that the community that becomes independent again can support itself, because otherwise they will end up costing the county more. And also that the reasoning for separation independence is rooted in something noble, and not to say prevent housing development or something, because there are large responsibilities that all these communities share, and that is one of them.
Okay, thank you. Next, Nikki.
Thank you for this question. So my approach as an organizer would be to listen, really listen to the people in our unincorporated areas. I do want to call out Barisha Spriggs, who's here joining us from Ashland, one of our Democratic Party delegates. I, have been trying to listen to folks like her and others to hear what they are interested in. And certainly there are a number of folks who do want to accelerate incorporation. She reminded me that back in 2011, the state's portion of the vehicle license fee that was held for unincorporated areas was taken away. There's been state legislation to reverse that, but it has failed. And we have 150,000 residents in our unincorporated areas. That is a large proportion of our county that doesn't have a voice. I've heard this called taxation without representation. And so I would be very supportive of a process to hear what the service gaps are and how we could potentially rectify more voice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have John.
Thank you. The question that was asked was about whether we would support acceleration. So just to be general, yes, this should be driven by the constituents. And in fact, this is all encoded in state statute, and it's got to be a local initiated process. The current process for incorporation typically takes somewhere between 1 and 1.5 years. It involves an incredible amount of time, money, and effort by the people who initiate that process to go through the LAFCO review process, hold an election, and then begin an even subsequent process for migrating over to fully incorporated independence from the county. The goal of incorporation should always be supported if it's supported by the local group, but not necessarily accelerated, but for a very good reason. The biggest evaluation that's made through this process is whether the local jurisdiction would be economically able to sustain itself and come off of county's assistance. So while I think that that's a noble thing to do, and we should support incorporation through other things like covering the costs of some of the process for a local that wants to do it, I think that we have to be really careful about accelerating beyond what's needed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, we have Ken.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Bass's example of the lost revenue is a really important example. It's only one of many revenue opportunities that are lost by that district. That being said, we can support an accelerated process, but the process has to be thorough. It has to be engaged. And folks in the unincorporated area don't understand as well as we need to help them understand what the revenue source is, which part of county, what they stand to gain and what they stand to lose. There are real potentials for incorporations that could really marginalize people in that area. And I think we have to be very thoughtful to support an equity approach to incorporation there, and to make sure that everyone is involved in that decision. Every community is deeply engaged, and every community has their voice heard, and heard well.
Okay, thank you. Next we have, we're past the halfway point on our questions. Of our 9 questions, here's number 5. And the first person to answer it will be Chris. What would be your priorities as County Supervisor, District 5?
Thank you. My platform is a clean and safe Alameda, CASA. So this is our home. I've been here in Alameda County for 40 years, and it's never been this bad. We hear a lot of talk about policy and a lot of other things on this call, but nobody is talking about the chaos that's going on in our community. The chaos of 6,000 businesses that stopped paying business tax in Oakland last year. What is that doing? It drops the revenues. The failed policy of our elected leaders, those failed policies, they don't see that it's declining the revenues, and therefore it doesn't give us revenues to support the homelessness and support the people that need money in our community to survive. What am I going to do? I'm bringing back more services, more safety for this community. That's what I'm running on, and that's what I'll bring to the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Gerald.
Okay, in addition to the 2 things I've said before, that is getting rid of fentanyl and a unconditional surrender by the drug cartel, that's not debatable, unconditional surrender. Number 2, infrastructure, water, energy, so we have a future. That's my priority. The people have a future. Number 3 is developing the creativity and imagination of the young people. Example, we grew up with, I'm a little older than you guys, I'm 71. John F. Kennedy. We're going to put a man on the moon in this decade. We had no idea how we would do it, but we did it. John F. Kennedy is your shining example. The space program is the greatest imagination for young people. They ain't going to be robbing cannabis shops on Embarcadero and Fifth if we had a live space program to capture the young people's imagination. That's my priority, the young people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Laurel.
Thank you. When elected, my first priority is revitalization. We have high social services spending needs in the county, and a district with an aging population that's on a fixed income making static tax payments. We're seeing legacy businesses like Blue Shield, like Kaiser Permanente, like Clorox reduce their local workforce. We've been hampered with a history of policies that's been really hard to implement. Renegotiations for land use policies, for renewable energy action, and for healthcare spending have long been stalled in our county, and it doesn't have to be this way. The challenges in our district create opportunities for growth, opportunities to draw on the strength of our district and deliver results. And I will use my proven legal, data, and community building skills to bring the district and the county together to implement multi-pronged solutions to problems that have long plagued the county.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Next up, Ben.
Thank you. This morning I spent time at the funeral for Officer Lay, the murdered officer in Oakland. And it was the first time I went to a funeral where literally everyone was crying. And, I'm here to make the streets safe for everyone, and it includes public safety. So Public safety is a big one. It's all I hear about all the time. And no one deserves to live in fear. And so supplementing law enforcement with dispatch support, opening up new funding streams for recruitment, new special jurisdictions for investigation and data sharing, and there's a wealth of other solutions we can do as well. I'm on the board of the Brady campaign, and we have a whole panoply of policy tools that I want to deploy through the county. And then second, most important as well, is to rebuild the health system. Right now it's failing. You see it failing because of the people in the streets. We need 14,000 new mental health hospital beds. And so in Berkeley, we've created the first imprint at this at solving this, so deployed for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Nikki.
Thank you. So my priorities would be the 3 H's: housing, homelessness, and healthcare. The county is our social service and healthcare agency. In terms of housing, I co-authored an Oakland bond measure that's raising $350 million for affordable housing. I'm on the executive board of the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is working to place a regional bond measure on this year's ballot. These bond proceeds would support construction, acquisition, and preservation of housing, but we need to partner with the county to secure their funds through Measure W, the county's Measure W, to pair that construction and acquisition with operation services to serve our unhoused community. We also need to further protect tenant rights across the county. In terms of homelessness, we need a stronger coordinated entry program and more coordination with our cities to pair and integrate services. And around healthcare, we need to make sure Alameda Health Systems is strong, is accountable, is transparent, and that we support our community health clinics.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have John.
Thanks. My top 3 priorities if elected county supervisor would be: first is to address the growing public safety issues that Alameda County has and ensure that the public safety personnel we have across this county receive the support they need to provide for our common safety, which is the foundation to all things that government can do properly. Second is to remove administrative and procedural barriers to addressing homelessness by prioritizing changes within Alameda County's structure for service delivery, including things like the Alameda County Charter, to allow us to competitively staff up and have behavioral health staffing and better coordination with cities to allow for us to address short and long-term solutions to homelessness through both shelter plus care, but as well as affordable housing production. And then finally, I would support working people and small businesses in Alameda County towards economic prosperity by providing important jobs and helping families remain stable and housed, which is something we've done here in Emeryville to help build our community and make it a thriving place for people to live.
Okay, thank you. Next, Ken.
Yeah, again, more than 70% of the county's budget is around health and human services, social services. So there are 3 things that I would do immediately. One, I would work with law enforcement to make active intervention plans so that we say, no, we are not, but we're going to actively intervene when even smaller crimes are being committed, not for the purpose of locking up a young person or an adult, but for the purpose of then following up and using the billions of dollars that's currently on the table that we've not maximized to provide services and support so that we have an active intervention plan. We have to stop saying what we don't want to do and start saying what we do want to do. The second thing that I would do is I would look at our mental health system and say, never again are we going to discharge somebody from John George that's had an acute psychiatric incident without a support system that we know can follow them and that is attached to housing that's durable. And the third thing is I would attach mental health services as a preventative measure to every single school in this county in partnership with the superintendent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, for this question, we have Greg.
Cool, thank you. I think that the priorities that we've all listed are the ones that we can focus on. The big question, if we work together with housing advocates and others to create a comprehensive policy around increasing housing production, with a heavy emphasis on affordability, preserving existing affordable housing, protecting Oakland residents from housing instability. On public safety, I think a fully resourced community is a safer community, and so we need to make sure that wherever we can do this to work with law enforcement, and work with a very targeted sort of law enforcement to get to the right sizing of it. But really, we ought to be providing economic and educational opportunities to all our young people. And then mental health and wellness. The big question for me is like how we get to this. And so one of the experiences I've had as a facilitator over the last 25 years or so is how do we get people talking together across the city, the county, all of the cities that make up Alameda County, and get us working together. Though that is the fundamental challenge. It is not the identification of issues. It really is how we work together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Question number 6. We'll begin with Gerald in a minute. The question is, ranked choice voting is gaining ground as a more democratic voting method. Do you support ranked choice voting? Why or why not? Would you advocate for ranked choice voting for Alameda County Supervisor races and other races? And Gerald, you're first.
I am the author of the resolution against ranked choice voting that unanimously passed in the Republican Party State Convention. I also am very aware, I see Mr. Hutchinson is in the house. Maybe he could tell you how ranked choice voting worked out in Alameda County. It's made Alameda County the butt of many jokes all over the country, I can assure you. Cities like Sunnyvale that had ranked choice voting got rid of it. There's an algorithm run by, you guys are against corporate control. Supporting ranked choice voting is supporting corporate control. They have algorithms that are secret. I asked Mr. Dupuis, what in tarnation happened? Why did you come up with the wrong answer? And he still hasn't answered the question, because it's actually the company that knows that, and he doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Laurel.
Thank you. So I'm generally supportive of ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting. No election method is perfect, but overall, it's a more democratic and less expensive than the first past the post method that we use in most of our elections that we're familiar with. Ranked choice voting also requires candidates to appeal to a broader swath of the electorate and not just a plurality of really rabid supporters. It helps eliminate the need for expensive runoff elections where voter participation significantly drops off. And this means that the runoff, in the runoff, a much smaller proportion of the electorate is actually choosing the winner. So it helps enfranchise voters. It eliminates the spoiler effect where less preferred candidate is elected because a non-viable candidate siphons votes away from the most popular candidate. One of the issues that sometimes raised, all right, that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Next, Ben.
Yes, we passed in Berkeley a while ago, and I think it's generally okay, but it does have some issues that need to be worked out before it's going to be expanded. Particularly at the County of Alameda, the registrar needs to be worked up. Their office really mishandled this last election, and it was really unfortunate and painful to watch. I think it needs more oversight. I think their algorithm, as mentioned by our colleague here from the party, needs a closer look. And I think the other downside is that it results in people winning without a mandate. But the benefits are definitely, they're good. But I think there needs some tweaking for sure.
Okay, next, Nikki.
I'll simply say yes, I do support ranked choice voting. I would advocate for it at the county level. It is more democratic, it encourages a diversity of candidates, and it does reduce costs. There will be a lot of money spent on this particular election for the March primary and the November general election that could be streamlined for everyone. And with a field of candidates as large as this one, with so many qualified candidates, it does give voters more choice, more opportunity to really use their vote to match their desires. So I do support it.
Thank you. Next, John.
Yeah, similarly, I support ranked choice voting because it's a more accurate reflection of the will of the people. It allows people from marginalized or minority communities or people who have candidates that perhaps maybe do not gain the majority support from the electorate on the whole, the opportunity to also still have their voice heard while saving us the time and money that's associated with runoffs and secondary elections. I actually think a lot of the money that could be saved from that should be used towards public financing. I think there's a separate question about how ranked choice voting has been administered in Alameda County, which wasn't the question that was asked, but clearly there's a need to have independent oversight of how ranked choice voting is implemented because failure to do that properly undermines the integrity of that system, which is a democratic one, and it creates doubt in the minds of people that doesn't need to exist because it actually does fulfill the intent of the people.
Okay, next, Ken.
Yeah, I love ranked choice voting, but like everything, there has to be an execution, and we didn't execute, and there are jurisdictions, there are many jurisdictions who have shown ways in which ranked choice can be executed in a way that it works and it works well. So as soon as we get very clearly together that we know that we're not going to have the kinds of issues that we've seen before, that we're clear on the rules, that we're clear on the execution, then I think we can really go forward with comfort with it. And I think it's a far better process for all the reasons outlined by all the other candidates.
Okay, thank you. Next, Greg.
Yeah, in general, I support ranked choice voting, having lived through a couple of elections. It creates a diversity of choices for the public. I would pair ranked choice voting with publicly financed campaigns. I mean, I don't think you can really get to the message that you want to get out to voters without having the resources to do it. And I think that notion of equalizing that piece, so you don't have an outsized influence of any particular faction in our community, whether it's labor or elected officials and that sort of thing. And then lastly, the voters need to be educated about how this is supposed to work. I noticed that during the mayoral campaign I was in a year and a half ago, that lots of people, including candidates, didn't understand how ranked choice voting worked. The county registrar could have done a much better job of implementing it, as Ken just said. I think that it matters a lot in terms of how people thought about it. Most of us thought we had 3 choices, and it turned out we had 5. And this is all the 11th hour stuff. So I just think that we could do a better job of educating voters about it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lastly, for this question, we have Chris.
Thank you. I think Greg just made a lot of points, very important points. One thing, registrar of voters, they actually gave you the incorrect party preference for me, right? I'm no party preference. So that was incorrect earlier. But the main point, and I like what Greg said, is if you ask anybody on the street, probably most of the people on this on this panel here, how is your vote counted in ranked choice voting? No one knows. Unless and I've read it actually, and I do understand it, but not even the ROV understands it because, heck, the 2022 school board race was incorrectly tabulated, right? So until the public understands how ranked choice works and how their vote counts, and they don't today, it's clear they don't, and the ROV doesn't. But until that happens, we should not expand this. I'm totally supportive of it, but people need to understand how their vote works and how it counts for the community. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to question 7 of 9. And the first person to answer this will be Laurel. This says Albany is an Alameda County behavioral health service area. Yet it receives almost no service due to a lack of staffing, and Albany being on the other side of Berkeley, which provides its own. Do you support passing through funding the county receives to provide the service to Albany to help it fund delivery of those services for itself or some other solution?
Thanks. I support equitable distribution of funds for behavioral health services unless we budget to expand Alameda Health Services into Albany. I think pass-through funding to provide behavioral health services makes sense. I think behavioral health is critical for communities, and I fully support the best resources that we can provide. ideally, the behavioral health services would also be integrated with primary health care. I don't think it's equitable for Albany residents who need behavioral health services to have to travel elsewhere to get proper care. If there are residents in Albany that don't have the same, that don't have access to the same level of services that other areas of the county have, that's a problem. And I support solutions to that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ben.
Yes, absolutely. So the issue, one ancillary issue and secondary effect of not having your own service providing elements in town is that they end up migrating to other towns, and it produces a lot of disunity and disharmony. So yes, of course, I support Albany getting its share of mental health resources and staffing, 100%.
Hey, thank you. Nikki.
I fully support Albany residents getting the mental health and behavioral health services that they deserve. As an organizer, I would want to listen to residents. As a policymaker, I would want to look at what those solutions are. So I would have some questions going into this, including what services do residents need? What are the gaps that the county is not filling? Recognizing that about 90% of the behavioral health budget goes to community-based organizations to provide those services. Are those CBOs serving Albany? And if there was going to be pass-through money, does Albany currently have the infrastructure to directly provide those services? So there's more that I would want to find out. I also think that the Care First policy could set up an assessment of how this could move forward and what those services and structures could potentially be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, John.
Thanks. The question is about Albany receiving Alameda County Behavioral Health Services and being segregated due to Berkeley, which has its own health department. I don't support passing a direct payment through to Albany as proposed in this question because it's not actually addressing the problem. For a long time, Albany relied on Berkeley's independent health department to deliver health services, including specialty mental health care. Berkeley has a staffing shortage. In fact, their director from their health department is no longer filled in as a position. And as a result of that, Albany's residents have been deprived of meaningful access to health care through Alameda Health Services. The county does receive funding for the delivery of services to residents in Albany, but the problem has been that the county has been slow to add people to staffing to reach all the corners of the county, especially Albany. So that kind of feeling of disconnection is a real one in Albany, but further fragmenting the service system will not actually solve the problem. And instead, we need to unlock a better deployment of funds, including the mental health services funding the county has that it keeps in reserve, and adding more staff to the department.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ken.
Yeah, this is a complicated answer because first there's an opportunity in schools for schools to be able to build directly and still draw down the appropriate match. They can bill directly both to Medi-Cal and to insurance companies. And that's an opportunity that's just opened up now and that we have to assertively help the schools to understand and to implement. As it relates to the rest of the residents, there are some services where pass-through might make sense, but more importantly, there needs to be a designated person at Alameda Behavioral Health that is liaison to the city of Albany and that can walk through where there's service gaps and service implementations. Simply doing a pass-through just leaves federal and state dollars on the table. And doing that by itself is not a solution. But there are certain targeted services that you can do by doing a pass-through that could be implemented better by local government. But it would be partial, and it certainly isn't a complete solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Greg.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think that the first thing we need to do is just assess what the real needs are. I think Ken referenced it, the notion of figuring out where the equity issues lie in this are going to be important. Second, I think that Albany, like every other city in the county, has a unique infrastructure, and sometimes it's a strong infrastructure, sometimes it's not. I take a close look at schools, senior centers, other places where those services could be delivered, and then figure out what's the best approach to doing it. I don't think that necessarily a pass-through in and of itself solves any of these problems. I know that lots of behavioral health dollars lie unused on the table currently in all parts of the county. And so I think we're at a moment where we really need to get smarter about how we deploy these services, get smarter and about how everybody in the county can really benefit from this, because that mental health issue and that set of wellness, overall wellness, matters a lot to everybody in this county.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're not, or the county is not taking a data-driven approach to this. So there's certainly data out there that they could use, maybe looking at records of incidents or other information that they could use a GIS system or do a heat map and see really where are the issues. Are they in Albany? Are they in Berkeley? Or where are they throughout the whole county? And then the county should actually allocate and resources in that manner. So they certainly, it sounds like today, Albany's not getting any of those resources. It's getting stuck in Berkeley. And that is obviously a key issue. And again, it gets to my point earlier. You have a lot of staff working, you have big expenses and lots of money spent at the county, but it's not finding its way out to the right places in the community. I think it's stuck in by staff that's not using technology to figure out the proper way to allocate. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, for this question, Gerald.
Yes, I leave it to you guys who are officials and active in the area that is under question, because I actually do not know the answer, and I admit it. However, I want to go back to my old friend, John F. Kennedy, and the space program. The reason we have health services is because of the medical and technical spin-offs from NASA, artificial hearts, artificial limbs, eye implants. It's all from NASA. If you want to have great health care, fund NASA, fund research, application into industry, productive jobs, a vision for the future, for the children, happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness meaning having a meaningful life, doing something that lives on after you and I are dead and gone. And people say, wow, what those people did when they went to Mars, that revolutionized things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the 8th of our 9 questions, we'll start off with Ben. It's the whole county votes on taxes paid only by residents of unincorporated areas, such as the utility user tax extension in 2020, Measure V. Would you pursue legislation restricting such votes to those living in unincorporated areas?
You know, ostensibly I would say yes, but I'd have to have a real study on the economic impact of that, because the way these things work, everyone's interconnected, and the communities of the county are interconnected, and there are flows of capital and flows of resources that are connected to each thing we're doing. So I would need to really examine this to make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you. Nikki.
This would have to reform existing law, obviously. I would want to do community engagement, again, as an organizer, really listening to the community, as well as looking at the equity impacts, the revenue impacts. Measure V has been continued through 2033, so there is time to get feedback and do some research around this. It does provide a significant portion of services to our unincorporated areas, around 12 million towards the sheriff, the library, planning, code enforcement. So it's critical. And again, with my approach being both an organizer as well as a policymaker, I would combine listening together with research, data analysis, and equity.
Okay, thank you. John.
Yeah, the answer to this question is in some circumstances. The situation with special taxes is one where residents in the unincorporated county who are the ones paying a tax and it's going to a specific purpose in their area, they should be the only ones voting on that tax measure. It'd be no different than saying, why would the citizens of Emeryville vote on an Albany parcel tax for its schools? That shouldn't happen. But that would not necessarily be my same thought on a general tax. So if the county is bound by state law to provide core health, safety, and welfare services to residents across the county, county, including the unincorporated county. We should not have the residents in that county suppose that they're going to go vote for themselves for a type of general tax independent of the rest of the county, but a service that would ultimately benefit them. That could lead to a situation where if they're able to vote no, the rest of the county starts essentially shelving and bearing the cost of services that they're entitled to by law, which could create conflicts in the equity of service delivery and cost absorption. So I think that we need to look at that. It depends on the type of tax that comes out and the county's general fund budget and how it would be implicated by the tax.
Thank you. Next is Ken.
Yeah, look, there are issues where they might only affect the unincorporated areas. And if we could actually restrict that to understanding that this was an issue that only impacts the unincorporated area, yes, that might make sense. But the fact is, there is so much coordination of service when you look at fire service, when you look at ambulance service, when you look at all kinds of infrastructure issues, that it becomes much more complicated than just saying, does this affect the unincorporated areas? This has to be factored into the discussion about incorporation, because once if they choose to incorporate, then you have something that looks more like the rest of the county. It's only because we have the area of Cherryland, Castro Valley, et cetera, that's quite populated, that in every other way behaves like an incorporated area, but is not incorporated, that this becomes a complex issue. But right now, you have to separate out what's got to be coordinated and what's specific to that area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Greg.
Yeah, I don't have much new to add to this. I agree with much of what I've heard in terms of, one, listening to what the voters in that area believe is necessary, two, being very specific around any sort of tax initiative that is only going to apply to the folks in that county, in the unincorporated areas, and that's who should vote on it, right? And then the third piece is to really think about the coordination of services and how services really get delivered. So I think what's been said here so far is smart. This is probably one of, the things I believe is important about all of this is that it's, sometimes in candidate forums, we're all sort of vying to say the unique and special thing. And so I think that really listening to each other and then lifting up the best of those ideas and leading with that in mind is really the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Next, Chris.
Yep. Thank you. Hey, if we actually read the ordinance here, it says, 12 million annually, which may fund county services, including services to unincorporated areas. So it essentially says, hey, the county voted for a tax on the unincorporated area, and those funds that unincorporated people are paying could be used anywhere in the county and might be used in their county. So absolutely, this doesn't make sense, right? The people that are voting for a tax, that tax should benefit them, and others should not be voting on that for them. So yeah, I think this is something that needs to be properly addressed, and that's what I would do as a supervisor for the county.
Thank you. Next, Gerald.
Again, I defer to the people who are the elected officials and knowledge in these areas. However, back to John Kennedy. When I was 12 years old, I went to the World's Fair in New York. We cut school to go, and we saw a demonstration of nuclear fusion power, unlimited energy, which had John Kennedy and others, Robert Kennedy, lived, we already had nuclear fusion on the electrical grid, meaning we would have virtually limitless, cheap energy. So we wouldn't be quibbling about a tax of this and a tax on that. The key is energy flux density. How much energy you get per square meter, per square of your energy source. Nuclear fusion is deuterium, tritium. It's in seawater. It's limitless. It's what powers the sun. And we're...
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Laurel.
Thanks. So yes, I support this legislation. It makes sense for affected residents to vote on their own taxes. Like John said, I'm sure all the other municipalities in the county wouldn't appreciate an entire county vote on their local tax measures. And I think there are also some equity issues here. If you're taxing this community that can't afford the tax and would have voted against it, you're potentially opening them up to require additional social services, which is an additional burden on the county because you're making them pay an additional tax that could be hard for them. So I agree we should look at the data around the tax, the money that it brings in, and the services that are provided to the specific community. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Our last question for the night, which will begin with Nikki answering this one. I will read in a moment, but then after this, we have 1 minute closing statements from each candidate. The question is, the county proposed and the voters passed the unincorporated area utility users tax extension without any equity provisions. PG&E's billing system provides for exempting customers on care from utility user taxes. Do you support placing a measure on the ballot to add this feature?
Thanks for this question. I absolutely support equity and equitable outcomes. As council president in Oakland, over the past 3 years, I've overseen our budget process over 2 budget cycles. And in the 2021 budget, I added a policy directive that has guided our budget process going forward to make sure that equity is instilled in every part of our budget. So even when we look at bond measures, for example, we have an equity review of what the impacts of that bond measure would be, or that ballot measure. I do want to note here that in addition to supporting equity, I support sound fiscal policy. And as I understand it, about 33% of PG&E residential customers are on care. So I'd also want to look at what would be the revenue impact if they were exempted. How would we offset that revenue reduction? And or whether we would be okay with some kind of service reduction so that the county can maintain a balanced budget. So I would lead with equity as well as fiscal policy.
Thank you. The next, John.
Thank you for the question. The simple answer to this question is yes, and it's a mistake that the county didn't incorporate that into the ballot measure when it was originally submitted to the voters. The bottom line is that when you can't afford your utilities and you don't have access to a program like CARE, the inability to pay a utility is a reason why a family becomes homeless. We look at the homelessness problem around the county, and while there's a lot to be said about behavioral and substance use care, a lot of people actually become homeless because they cannot financially support themselves in housing. And it's bills like these that become the problem. PG&E just got a very large universal rate increase from the CPUC that's going to make this type of bill even more onerous for a working family or a low-income family or parent with children. And so this is something that can't just be casually talked about. It has to be addressed. I've been the chair of the City of Emeryville's Budget Committee for 8 years and have passed a number of taxes in the city and run those campaigns, most recently an equitable transfer tax that has larger property owners and commercial properties paying much more of its fair share towards taxes, and that's what should happen in the same case here.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Ken.
Yeah, we thank you. We can't talk about homelessness and then say, if you can't pay your utility bills, you can't have utilities. You just can't have that discussion. You know, my wife has been working on legislation around the country because we charge when we take people's children into foster care. Some states and even California until recently, until we passed a new law, charged the people who were among the people that had the lowest incomes in the state for their children's care and foster care. Is unconscionable, and on average kids stayed in care 4 months longer when we did that instead of being able to go home to their families. This is the same kind of thing. We do have to be fiscally responsible, but we also have to reach out to our partners at the state and say, this is something that's an imperative. We can't simply say we're going to shut somebody's utilities off because they can't afford to pay.
Okay, thank you. Next is Greg.
Yeah, I definitely think that we need to place a measure on the ballot to add to this feature. I think equity should drive all of this. And I get a little nervous when we hear people say fiscal accountability, as a counterbalance almost to equity, because equity really does mean, meeting differential need with differential resources. And I just think that there's a really important principle that's got to be followed here. to make sure that, when with that utility user tax extension didn't have any equity provisions, it makes a difference. I learned a lot during the campaign from mayor a year and a half ago about why people become homeless. Typically, it's if you missed one rent payment and you couldn't make it up, if you were one paycheck away from being able to pay your utilities, it was really people on a really fragile kind of situation. So I think that there's a really important principle here, and I think that all these issues are connected in terms of homelessness and the unhoused, and some of the issues really need to be taken in, look at it as a whole.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Next, Chris.
Yep. I think that really probably the problem here is Prop 218 likely restricts the ability for the county to pass this through or provide a care-like program for this. The CPUC is not under Prop 218, and that's likely why they can provide a CARES program. It's once again, failed policy has actually brought the community to this, right? How are people going to afford their utility bills like this month, with utility bills going up a projected 30%? And it's what the entrenched politicians that we see here and see across our community continue to pass laws and failed policy that are just killing the people in the street, the people that are in East Oakland, in West Oakland, and across our community. They can't afford these bills. They can't afford the bills from 2 years ago. And now rates are going up. So absolutely, we need more programs to help those able to live under this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Gerald.
The question of unincorporated area utility tax user extension without equity. Well, the only equity is if we get a lot of energy and we get the energy cheap, because the energy cost goes into everything. The trucks that deliver the food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So equity, based on the fact that we're all human beings, no matter what color or race, we're all created in the image of the Creator. Therefore, we improve our technology and we make more equitability for every person, every single person. We don't have victims. We have Promethean individuals who are all striving to do something productive and beautiful, graceful for humanity as a whole, for ourselves and for posterity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Laurel.
Thank you. Yes, I support this measure, and I support all equitable policies and taxes. I am not a proponent of regressive taxes. A tax that is levied across the board will automatically disadvantage residents like those that are relying on care. If we have provisions to alleviate the tax burdens of our most vulnerable residents, then I support that wholeheartedly. Finding other avenues of generating income in the county is also a must. Like, I don't know how we can sleep at night if we think that additional taxes on people who are relying on government assistance to make ends meet is the most important revenue source for the county. I go back to my top priority of revitalization efforts to bring back businesses, elevate current businesses, tap into our strengths as a county, like tourism and culture, things that make this county such a great place to live, and all of which can also be source of revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, for this last question, we have Ben.
Thank you. This goes back to one of my first measures I passed in Berkeley was decriminalizing fines and fees. And then later on, exemption of fees, exemption of fines, forgiveness of fines, and forgiveness of fees, because people are nickel and dime to death, and the weakest among us are forced out because of it. So, in Berkeley, thanks to my leadership, we insist on having equity-based carve-outs for everything we do, from bonds to housing costs to energy costs, you name it. It's imperative to an equitable society, and not balancing budgets off the backs of the poor.
Okay, thank you. And that does it for our questions. Next, we have a 1-minute statement from each, a closing statement from each candidate. And since Nikki went first in this last round, the person who's going to go first is next in the list, which is John. So John, you have 1 minute to give us your pitch.
Thanks. I just want to thank the volunteers of the Albany Democratic Club and its members for coming out this evening to listen to each of the candidates. That's what makes this process both fun and also fruitful in the end. I'm somebody who's lived experience, and my time across 20 plus years of work in the nonprofit sector have prepared me to work for Alameda County in the role that this job requires. I've worked in homeless services, disaster relief services, and I've done work with victims of crime, and safety, homelessness, and the work that we need to do to build this county are on the agenda this year. I'm proud to be endorsed by both assembly members from this district, which is Mia Bonta and Buffy Wicks. I have the support of 10 of the 14 mayors across Alameda County, including 30 of the local elected officials who serve across this district, because they've worked alongside me and know that I'm capable of delivering results for our county. I'm proud to have just recently received the sole endorsement of the Alameda County Firefighters, Local 55, which are our public safety leaders, and trust my judgment on these issues. And I would be very proud to have not just your endorsement, but your vote tonight. And I look forward to working with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Ken.
Yeah, folks, look, we know that things aren't working right now. It's really clear that things aren't working. And I have spent my life figuring out solutions to problems that are both technical and collaborative. I've been someone that's brought together folks that had very differing opinions on the Alameda County Board of Education. And in my work as a consultant to counties, I've worked to look at both the technical and broad-based solutions to real problems. And I've been able to look across the state to see who's got best practice in homelessness, who's got best practice in crime reduction, and most importantly, who's got best practice in supporting people to be on the kind of path that's going to be helpful. There's a certain amount of technical knowledge that's involved in working with the county budget of health, that's 70% health and human services and law enforcement. I know how to do that. I can bring that expertise, and I'm really, really hopeful. I'm really optimistic that solutions can be put on the table that'll be durable.
Thank you. Did we lose Brian? Oh, no.
Sorry, I muted myself and didn't realize it. Next is Greg.
Likewise, I want to thank the Albany Democratic Club for this opportunity. I think the questions have been very thoughtful. And I'm actually, Brian, very impressed that we got through all of this, because as a facilitator, I was looking at this thinking there's no way we're going to get through all of these questions. I want to make sure that we are represented well in this county with the listening skills that I've developed over a 40-year career, lifting up good ideas. And this is an example of these collective ideas. I feel like I've learned a lot tonight or this afternoon. I don't know what time it is. I'm 11-hour time difference right now, so I don't quite know what time it is. I would appreciate your endorsement. Would love to have the opportunity to serve and extend my public service in this way. I've served a lot of young people over the 40 years that I've been doing work here in Oakland. I think this is a historic moment, and I think that identity politics matters. This has typically been kind of considered an African-American seat, starting with John George in 1976. Would love to have your support, and would love to work with you going forward, no matter what happens in this election.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next is Chris.
Yes, thank you. Once again, thank you for holding you got me on there. Looks like I'm not on the screen. There we go. Yeah, thank you for holding the forum this evening. And it actually was fun to hear everybody's comments and thoughts. Overall, we know, let's just think about it. The majority of the voters in our community are afraid, right? They don't go out to dinner anymore. They go to other communities. They go over to Contra Costa County. We see that in the businesses closing. We see that in all of the crime in our community. I mean, let's face it, it is there. And it's a result of the failed policies from the entrenched politicians that are actually beside us here today. And so I'm not a politician. I'm not here for, a lifetime role in politics. but I am here to fix this community and really focus on what matters. And what matters is safety for our community. We need to support safety. We need to support public safety. And that's what I'm running for, a clean and safe Alameda County. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Gerald.
Okay, in conclusion, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, and to bind up the nation's wounds, and to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Lincoln was shot and killed 40 days later. Abraham Lincoln, John Kennedy, William McKinley were all denied a second term. They were killed by assassins who are traced back to the British Empire. Got all the documentation. That's what's being done to Trump right now. The British are threatening to kill Trump right now. They were laughing today in DC. He's going to be in a car like Kennedy. You'll see. They'll get him. So do we have a nation or not? I love this nation. I love all of you. I like to work with you.
Thank
All right, next we have Laurel.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today. Thank you for having me and for putting on such a well-run forum. In my work with mission-driven nonprofits as clients and as a leader within nonprofits, I have excelled as a community builder. I have brought together hundreds of leaders from across the entire country to learn from each other, share resources and best practices, so we can all better serve our local communities. I'm ready to use my leadership, my proven community building skills to serve the people of Alameda County and to bring about the change that we all deserve. I would be honored to have your support and also your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, Ben.
Thank you. And thank you again for having us here. I'm really honored to be before you, my esteemed colleagues here. I want to thank you again. I'm Ben Bartlett, and the lifetime of activism. I was born son of activists and raised in the Democratic Party, where I was the top organizer in the state at one point, organized people in South LA to great benefit to this community, even now statewide. And at this point, my track record is profound. Everything from housing to healthcare, transportation, equity, public safety. We have done it all, and I've led in every facet. And the natural benefit of that work is to go to the county and make sure the benefits apply to everyone. And so to that end, I'm endorsed by former Oakland Mayor and Assemblyman L.U. Harris, Berkeley Mayor Jesse Arguin, and the majority of the Berkeley City Council, majority of the Berkeley School Board, Oakland Council members Kevin Jenkins and Janani Ramachandran. And thank you again. Check me out at Ben2024.vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Nikki.
Thank you so much to the Alameda Democratic Club for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's clear that voters want more from us to solve our challenges. And I believe our voters, our diverse communities deserve a coalition builder, an organizer, a champion on the Board of Supervisors who'll fight for affordable housing, homeless solutions, healthcare, safety, and sustainability that we need. I have a track record from my work before serving as an elected official, as an organizer, to the work that I have done on the Oakland City Council. I work in a tough environment. I work with all our branches of government. I've been able to balance our budgets, making tough choices to promote equity and to make sure that we preserve city services and avoid layoffs. I've been a champion for tenants' rights, for creating affordable housing, for helping our land trusts. I'm proud to be endorsed by Senator Nancy Skinner, the California Nurses Association, the Alameda Labor Council, the California Working Families Party, and many, many individuals. I would be humbled to have your endorsement.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes our candidate forum, hearing from all the candidates. We would like to thank all the candidates for taking the time to share with us their background and their ideas. Albany voters as well as all the voters in this district will be presented with 9 mysterious names, some of them more mysterious than others, on their ballot coming soon. And we really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you all and on issues that are important to Albanians. And with that, we close this session, and we can stop the video. And then we ask that everyone who's not a paid member would leave. But Nick has some things to say first, and then those paying members will discuss and we'll work on our vote. Go ahead, Nick. I think you're muted.
Thank you. I'll echo the thanks to all who participated. It was great to get almost everyone here. Thank you so much for that. And I'll lift the prohibition on putting putting the information in the chat. If you want to put your best contact information for your campaign in the chat, you can do so now. We'll give you a few moments to do that, and then we'll ask all the non-dues paying members to leave after that. So thanks once again.
I also wanted to thank Nick for helping to organize this. As the past president, I know that was a lot of work, the work that goes into coordinating with everybody and getting this to actually happen.
All right. So once the candidates have put their information in the chat, we'll ask that only the dues paying members stay back for the discussion. And if you're not sure if you're a dues paying member or not, to let us know, but we probably know who you all are. So wait a few more moments. Still one candidate there. Let's see. How are we doing? Okay. There's one candidate, Gerald. You'll have to leave at this time. Gerald Pechinek.
Yep, will do. Thanks a lot, Nick, and thanks a lot for your perseverance.
And then who is on the phone number ending in 4563?
That's me. I think I'm on 2 calls.
Oh, Eleanor.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll hang up. I'm sorry. I thought I had hung up on the other call. I was on my way from the airport.
Okay, great.
And maybe Nick, you want to stop the recording?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Good.